Hello, I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
And I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And we're the Insiders. And this week we're going to talk about the interim report from Justice Gableman regarding the elections in Wisconsin. A lot of people thought it was going to be the final report, but apparently it's the interim report, and there will be more coming from Justice Gableman. But Chuck, you've had a chance to look at it, and what do you think?
You know, it's a national embarrassment. If it weren't so serious, it would be just humorous as heck. But this is the guy who can't shoot straight. What's really disturbing about it, though, is this is Robin Vos trying to navigate, as we've talked about before. The Republicans, they don't want to be seen as so crazy that they say the election was stolen. They know that that's not true, but they want the votes of all those people who believe it, and it's a very significant part of their base. What's really going on here is Robin Vos trying to sow the seeds that there's a problem out there. And as Scott has pointed out, the vast majority of the Republican base, election integrity is one of their core issues. There is no election integrity problem. The only reason there's a problem is because the elected leaders keep saying, oh yeah, there's a problem. Well, what is it? Well, really, we don't have any facts that can point to it, but I'll appoint Gableman to see if he can find something. And then, of course, Gableman can't find anything that says that there was a problem with the election, but he just keeps going on, and it sows the seeds of doubt. Now, that may work as a political strategy for a Robin Vos, but it does not work for our democracy. And this is the great danger of Gableman. And this is why it's not funny, because if you sow enough seeds of doubt, you have people, and I have talked to election officials in our state who get death threats, who have terrible things said to them, who think about leaving their job, and they do a great job with elections in Wisconsin. This is deeply disturbing stuff that cores to the core of our democracy. And Gableman is just the most visible piece of it. But let's face it, Robin Vos didn't just say, okay, let's try it, and then see and say, oh, there's nothing here, let's get away. No, he extended the guy's contract. This is not good. This is really not good. So you know what ought to happen here? Robin Vos ought to be forced to choose. He can put two people in front of him, one crazy Gableman or the elected representative of, or not the elected representative, but the election commissioners from Green Bay, Madison, Eau Claire, you name it, wherever it is, some towns across Wisconsin. And by the way, the reason you know that what I'm saying is true and that what the Republican side is not true, there's one answer I have to that. Kathy Bernier. She is a profile in courage, a state senator on the Republican side who worked in the election process and says, there is no fraud here. This is ridiculous. Stop this. So much so, and she also was receiving threats, so much so that that fine representative is going to have to not run for election. She's decided not to run for re-election. And I'm sure a big piece of that was because of all of the crazy things that are being said. This is a threat to democracy. It's great to see people like Kathy Bernier, but Gableman, in history books, he will go down in history as a pariah.
So I actually was working as the report was being released and saw it come up on my screen that Justice Gableman's report was out, and one of the Madison papers had a nice summary of the 26 recommendations of the report. And I'm reading through the recommendations thinking, well, a lot of these make sense here. You've more training for the clerks. We should implement the things that the Legislative Audit Bureau said should be done. We should have more ways of verifying the information in the voter database, and we should make it available to people at a much reduced cost, because right now it's very expensive to buy. So they have a bunch of good things in there, and I'm walking along going, well, this actually came out actually better than I thought it was going to come out. And then Justice Gableman apparently decided to include in his appendix and in his remarks before the committee, the idea of a possibility of the state decertifying the election results. And that became the heart of the story. All of the media headlines were all about that, which was not actually part of the actual report. It was in the appendix in the back. And even that appendix said, well, even if you decertify this, it wouldn't change the results. We'd still have the same president we have right now. So that was just a huge tactical mistake on behalf of Justice Gableman. If he had stuck with just the recommendations, I think he'd have gotten a very different reception from the media and some of the other folks who criticized him. But putting that in there changed the whole focus of it. And headlines, not only in this state, but around the country, were all about decertification rather than some legitimate recommendations they had in the report for increasing and improving, increasing security, improving the quality of the elections that we run here in Wisconsin. So it was just a really unfortunate tactical mistake there that undermined all the work that they'd done in the recommendations.
Scott, there's some value in what you say in this regard. If there was a legislative council study committee to say, hey, let's make things even better, that would be fine. But that, you know, as well as I do, because the Republican base is worried about election integrity. They feel elections are stolen. That's why he had to include that in his report. Otherwise, the Republicans would not be able to go back to their base and say, oh yeah, this is terrible and we're going to change it. This is something that could have been done in a legislative council study, but instead Gableman had to go there because the crazies, we want the crazies vote. At some point, the Republicans need to choose. Are you for democracy or not? And if you are, then you have to honestly say to people, what I want to see is Robin Vos or even Scott Jensen saying face to camera, the election wasn't stolen. Whatever fraud issues that are out there are so minuscule, they could have no impact. We've had these issues for a long time, like, 10 felons voting who aren't supposed to vote. Those things are minuscule. They do not relate to the core of our elections, but the impression, instead in politics, it's always about what's the impression that's left? What are people feeling about this? And the feeling that Republicans are trying to create is that, oh, something awful and evil is here. There definitely has to be something done. In fact, so much so that we need to take a former Supreme Court justice to get to the bottom of the problem here. None of that is true. And Republicans need to say, no, that's not the way it is. They won't, because their base won't let it go. And why won't the base let it go? Because people appoint, it's a self-feeding loop. What happens is they report, they name a Gableman. Now for the rest of time in Wisconsin, well, remember the Gableman report? He knew, he looked at it all, and he said the elections should have been decertified. This is a terrible thing for democracy. We could literally lose our democracy over this and things like this going on in the other states. And apparently Republicans are willing to say power is more important than losing our democracy. The Democrats had this moment with George Wallace in 1968. We lost a presidential election over it. And you know what? That was fine. That was fine. Or in 1964, that was fine with us because we said, look, we're not going to go with George Wallace. I don't care what it costs us. And it cost us a lot. It was the start of the Nixon strategy for the South, for getting the South back. That's totally a racist-based thing. There's a reason Ronald Reagan announced in Philadelphia, Mississippi. But at some point, guys, you got to stand up for democracy, and the Republicans are not doing it. And Gableman is exhibit number one.
We're not going to lose our democracy, but we will be back to talk about this issue again, because apparently there's at least one more report coming from Justice Gableman.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.